The mud of Germany had a special kind of hunger. It didn't just suck at your boots. It felt like it was trying to pull the life right out of you, one miserable step at a time. We'd been walking in it, sleeping in it, and burying our friends in it since the Bulge. Now, in March of 1945, the brass was telling us the war was almost over. But down here in the cold, wet reality of it, almost was a lifetime away. My platoon was a ghost of what it had been. We were down to 16 men who knew how to stay alive, and I, Sergeant Arthur Keller, was responsible for every last one of them. That's why I hated seeing the truck arrive with replacements. They weren't soldiers. They were fresh meat, sent to us in clean uniforms that were an insult to the filth we lived in. This one was different, and not in a good way. Private Daniel Bishop looked like he'd gotten lost on his way to a university library. He couldn't have been more than 19, all sharp angles and bones, with hands that looked like they'd never held anything heavier than a pencil. His M1 rifle seemed alien in his grip, a borrowed tool he didn't understand. The first thing I did was walk up to him, my boots making a sucking sound with each step. "Let me see your rifle, Bishop," I grunted. He fumbled with it, his eyes wide with a nervousness that was almost painful to watch. As he tried to pass it to me, his clumsy fingers lost their grip, and the Grand clattered onto the muddy ground. A few of my boys chuckled darkly. I just stared at the rifle, then back up at his pale face. I didn't yell. Yelling was a waste of energy. I just let the cold silence do the work. "Pick it up," I said, my voice flat. "Clean it. Now. If I ever see your weapon touch the ground again, you'll be digging latrines with your helmet until we get to Berlin." He spent the next hour meticulously cleaning a rifle that was already spotless, his movements jerky and inefficient. The other men ignored him completely. To them, he was already a ghost, a walking casualty. He didn't have the hard look in his eyes, the thousand-yard stare that came from seeing too much. His eyes were still full of the world back home, a world that didn't exist out here. Later, as we prepared to move out, he made another mistake. He approached me, his canteen in hand. "Sarge," he asked, his voice barely a whisper, "is there a place to get, you know, clean water?" Frank Rhino Riley, a man built like a Sherman tank, actually snorted. I pointed a muddy finger towards a shell crater filled with brown, scummy water. "There. Boil it first, unless you want to die of dysentery instead of a German bullet. Your choice." Bishop just stared at the crater, his idealism visibly draining away. He was a burden, and we all knew it. Our objective was a small town just shy of the Rhine. Intelligence said it was lightly defended, a stepping stone. Intelligence was usually wrong. As we moved through the shattered forest bordering the town, every snap of a twig sounded like a gunshot. Bishop was a walking symphony of noise. His helmet wasn't fitted right, his pack straps were loose, and his canteen sloshed with every step. I had to drop back and get right in his face, my voice a low hiss. "You make one more sound, kid, and I'll gag you with my own sock. You want to get us all killed?" He froze, his face a mask of pure terror, and just nodded. He was trying, I'll give him that. But trying didn't stop bullets. The first shell came without warning, a high-pitched whistle that ripped through the air and ended in a deafening roar 50 yards to our left. "Incoming!" I bellowed, a reflex as natural as breathing. The veterans hit the dirt instantly, melting into the landscape. We were a part of the mud, a part of the earth. But Bishop just stood there. He was frozen solid, his back ramrod straight, his eyes locked on the spot where the shell had turned trees into splinters. He was a statue of fear, a perfect target. The second whistle was already screaming down. There was no time to think. I lunged, my shoulder crashing into his chest, and drove him backward into a shallow ditch. We landed in a heap of tangled limbs and cold mud, just as the world erupted in fire and steel. Dirt and shrapnel rained down on us, peppering my helmet. The blast was so close, I felt it in my teeth. I pushed myself off him, my face inches from his. He was hyperventilating, his eyes darting around wildly, completely gone. He hadn't just frozen, he had shattered. I grabbed the front of his jacket, shaking him hard. Look at me, Bishop," I snarled. His eyes finally focused on mine. "The next time you freeze, I won't be there to save you," I told him, the words like ice chips. "You're more dangerous than a whole squad of krauts." I let him go and crawled back to my position, not looking back to see if he followed. I didn't care. In my mind, I had already written him off. He was a liability, and in this line of work, liabilities end up on a list of names to be sent home to their mothers. We lay in the ditch for a few minutes after the shelling stopped, the silence that followed feeling heavier than the explosions. The air was thick with the smell of churned earth and cordite. I could hear Bishop a few feet away, his breathing still ragged and shallow. He was useless. Worse than useless. He was a danger. A man that afraid gets other men killed. I pushed the thought away and crawled back to Rhino, who was already checking our casualties. We were lucky. Just a few scrapes and a concussion for Miller, our machine gunner. The Germans were just ranging us, getting ready for the main event. Before we could even regroup properly, Lieutenant Davies came slithering up the line. He was even younger than Bishop, fresh out of West Point. And he still believed the war was something you could win with a map and a protractor. "Sergeant Keller," he said, his voice a little too loud, trying to project an authority he hadn't earned. "Change of plans. Command wants that bridge taken, now." He unfolded a map, already stained with mud. His finger, clean and uncalloused, pointed to a stone bridge crossing a muddy, swollen creek just ahead of the town. "Engineers are right behind us. We secure the bridge. They defuse any charges, and Patton's whole damn Third Army can roll right through. We're the tip of the spear, Sergeant." I hated that phrase. The tip of the spear is the part that breaks. I looked at the map. It showed the bridge, the town beyond, and a single road leading to it. On the west flank, a small wooded ridge overlooked the entire approach. It was an obvious kill zone. "They'll have an MG nest on that ridge, Lieutenant," I said, my voice low. "Maybe more. An anti-tank gun for sure. Walking down that road is suicide." The lieutenant frowned, annoyed that a grunt was questioning his textbook strategy. "We have artillery support scheduled. They'll soften it up. Your platoon will advance under that cover and secure the near side of the bridge." He looked at my exhausted men. Then his eyes fell on Bishop, who had finally crawled over, his face still the color of ash. A flicker of an idea, cold and ugly, formed in my mind. It was a cruel piece of arithmetic, but war is full of that. You trade one life to save 10. You cut off a limb to save the body. Bishop was the limb. "Sir," I said, my tone carefully neutral, "you're right. We need eyes on that ridge. Someone needs to get up there, find out exactly what we're walking into, and call in corrections for the artillery. A solo mission. Minimal exposure." Davies nodded eagerly, seeing the tactical sense in it, completely missing the subtext. "An excellent suggestion, Sergeant. Who do you have in mind?" I didn't even hesitate. I turned and looked straight at Bishop. He flinched, as if my gaze was a physical blow. "Private Bishop!" I called out. The boy scrambled to his feet. I looked at my other men. Rhino, Miller, Jackson, they all knew. Their faces were stone. But I saw it in their eyes. They understood what I was doing. They didn't like it, but they understood the necessity of it. Pity was a luxury we couldn't afford. "You see that ridge?" I pointed. "I need you to take this field telephone and a spool of wire. Crawl up there, find a concealed spot, and tell us what you see. You are our eyes. Do you understand?" He stared at the ridge, a dark, menacing shape against the gray sky. It might as well have been the moon. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Yes, Sergeant." His voice was a dry croak. I had Jackson hand him the heavy phone and the wire spool. The gear was almost as big as he was. He fumbled with it, his hands shaking so badly, I was surprised he could hold on. I walked over to him, getting close. "Listen to me, kid. You don't move unless you have to. You don't breathe unless you have to. You find a hole and you become a part of it. And you don't call us unless you see something big enough to stop a tank division, got it?" It was a death sentence wrapped in an order. The ridge was the most obvious target on the battlefield. The Germans would have it zeroed in for their mortars. If they had a sniper, he'd be looking right at it. Sending him there was like tying a goat to a stake to attract a tiger. Bishop just nodded, his eyes hollow. He knew. I think he knew. He adjusted the gear on his thin frame, took his rifle, and started walking towards the ridge. A small, lonely figure against the backdrop of the dead forest. He didn't look back. The moment he was swallowed by the trees, I turned to the rest of the platoon. My voice changed. It became hard, focused, alive. All right, listen up. Forget the lieutenant's plan. We're not walking down that road. The men leaned in, their expressions instantly sharpening. They trusted me, not the map. The Krauts will be watching that ridge, waiting for that poor bastard to make a move. While their attention is on him, we're going to use the creek bed to the east. It's a longer route, more mud, but it'll keep us out of sight. We'll hit the bridge from the flank while they're looking the other way. Rhino, you're on point. Miller, set up the 30 cal here to give us cover. Move out in 5. They dispersed immediately, a quiet, efficient machine. No one mentioned Bishop's name. It was like he had already ceased to exist. As I watched my men get ready, I allowed myself a final thought about the kid. Maybe he'd get lucky. Maybe he'd find a deep hole and stay in it until this was all over. But I doubted it. This war wasn't about luck. It was about making hard choices. And I had just made mine. The creek bed was a cold, muddy artery that snaked its way towards the bridge. It offered good cover, the steep, eroded banks hiding us from view. The plan felt solid, and for the first hour, it worked perfectly. We moved like phantoms. The only sounds the squelch of our boots in the thick sludge and the clink of gear I would have killed to silence. I could feel the tension in the men, but it was the good kind, the focused, professional tension of hunters, not the frayed nerve terror of the hunted. I allowed myself a grim sense of satisfaction. My plan was better. I was keeping my men alive by sacrificing one who was already dead in spirit. It was a cold, hard calculation, and it was the right one. We were 10 yards from the bridge abutment, the massive stone foundation offering a perfect staging point for the assault, when I realized how wrong I was. There was no warning shot, no single rifle crack to announce the ambush. One moment, we were ghosts in the mud. The next, hell opened up on us. The sound that ripped the air apart was one we all knew and feared. The tearing fabric roar of an MG-42, Hitler's buzzsaw. But it wasn't coming from the ridge where I'd sent Bishop, it was on our flank, hidden in a collapsed mill on the opposite side of the creek. They had let us walk right into the kill zone. They had been waiting for us the whole time. The first burst ripped through Jackson and Miller before they could even hit the ground. They were gone, just gone. The water around them turned a dark, swirling red. "Cover!" I screamed, diving behind a fallen log as a hailstorm of 18-inch Mauser rounds chewed the wood to splinters above my head. The world dissolved into a cacophony of noise and violence. Mortar rounds started to walk their way down the creek bed, perfectly ranged. The Germans knew exactly where we would be. Each explosion sent geysers of mud, water, and steel into the air. A man screamed a high, thin sound that was cut short by another blast. Rhino, my big, indestructible Rhino, was trying to lay down suppressing fire with his bar, but the MG-42 had him pinned. I saw a stream of tracers stitch across the mud bank in front of him, forcing him down. Then came the grenades. We saw the distinct shapes of steel hand granates, potato mashers, arcing through the air from the town side of the bridge. They landed in the water with soft splashes, followed by concussive booms that shook our bones and sent shockwaves through the creek. We were completely trapped, pinned by the machine gun, bracketed by mortars, and being picked apart by grenadiers we couldn't even see. Our support Sherman, the one meant to follow us down the road, must have been knocked out or was waiting for a signal that would never come. Lieutenant Davies was somewhere behind us, probably trying to call for that artillery support on a radio that was now silent. I saw him once, his face a mask of disbelief, trying to shout orders that no one could hear over the din. Then a mortar round landed near his position and I didn't see him again. We were alone. In the midst of the chaos, our own radio man, a kid named Peterson, took a round through the heavy radio set on his back. The machine sparked, smoked, and then died. Our last link to the outside world was gone. My mind raced, cycling through tactics, through options, but came up empty every time. We couldn't go forward. The bridge was a death trap. We couldn't go back the way we came. The mortars had it dialed in. The MG-42 prevented any move to the side. The carefully prepared trap I thought I was avoiding had been a decoy for this, the real one. The Germans had outsmarted me. I had led my men here. The guilt was a physical weight, heavier than my pack, heavier than the mud. I looked at the survivors, huddled behind whatever miserable cover they could find. I saw the look in their eyes, not just fear, but resignation. The 1,000-yard stare had become a look of finality. They knew, just as I did, that this was the end of the line. We were bleeding out in a muddy creek in a meaningless German town, and it was my fault. In the roaring hell of that firefight, the thought of the scared kid I'd sent to die on the ridge never even crossed my mind. He was a ghost, a forgotten calculation in an equation that had gone horribly, fatally wrong. Time ceases to exist when you know you're about to die. There are no seconds or minutes, only a series of lasts. The last muddy breath of air, the last glimpse of a gray sky, the last thought of a home you'll never see again. I watched the Germans massing on the far bank of the creek. They weren't hiding anymore. They were moving with the arrogant confidence of men who had already won. I heard an officer barking orders. Feuer frei auf mein Kommando. Fire on my command. This was it. The final volley. I gripped the stock of my M1. The wood slick with mud and my own sweat. I wasn't going to die cowering in a ditch. I would take one of them with me. I glanced at Rhino, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the enemy. We were down to 6 men capable of fighting. 6 men against what looked like a full platoon. We didn't stand a chance. Just as the German officer raised his arm to give the signal, a sound cut through the air that didn't belong. It was sharp, clear, and utterly American. The distinct ping of an M1 Garand ejecting an empty clip. But it hadn't come from our position. It had come from the ridge. The ridge I'd sent Bishop to. The German officer crumpled, a neat, dark hole appearing on his chest. For a split second, everyone on both sides froze. The Germans stared at their fallen leader, then spun around, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm, shouting at each other as they tried to locate the source of the shot. They were looking at the wooded ridge behind them, the place they thought was their secure rear. My own mind was a blank. Another company? A lost patrol? It made no sense. Then, before the Germans could reorganize, a second miracle happened. A grenade, a perfect throw, sailed in a high arc from the same ridge and landed squarely in the middle of the MG-42 nest at the collapsed mill. The explosion was a dull crump, followed by the beautiful, beautiful silence of that buzzsaw finally being shut down. The immediate pressure on us was gone. The Germans, who had been an organized assault force moments before, were now a panicked mob. They were yelling, firing blindly into the trees on the ridge, completely ignoring the 6 of us still stuck in the creek bed. A ghost was tearing them apart from the inside, and they had no idea where it was. I didn't know what was happening, and I didn't care. An angel, a demon, or a lost battalion of the 101st Airborne. It didn't matter. It was a chance. A 1 in a million chance. Now, I roared, my voice raw. Rhino, on me. Fire and move. Cover the left flank. The training, the endless drills took over. My men, who had been preparing to die, were now a fighting unit again. We scrambled from our positions, using the Germans' confusion to move. We weren't attacking. We were executing a fighting retreat, pulling back along the creek bank, dragging our wounded with us. Each man fired a few rounds towards the bridge, enough to keep the enemy's heads down, then fell back another 10 yards. The chaos in the German lines intensified. As we moved, I saw a bright flash from the ridge, followed by the whoosh of a bazooka round. It was a wild shot, probably fired by a single man struggling with the weapon, but it was a lucky one. The rocket slammed into the side of a German Opel Blitz truck parked near the bridge, a supply vehicle by the looks of it. The truck's fuel tank must have been hit because it erupted in a massive fireball, sending black smoke billowing into the sky. The secondary explosions of the ammunition it was carrying started a chain reaction, turning the German staging area into an inferno. Now they weren't just panicked, they were in a full-blown rout, their position completely compromised. I saw soldiers breaking and running for the cover of the town, convinced they were being hit by a major coordinated attack. The Ghost on the ridge kept firing, single, methodical shots, each one adding to the confusion, each one a nail in the coffin of their assault. I huddled behind the curve of the creek bank, pulling a wounded Jones to safety. I peered back towards the ridge. I couldn't see a thing through the smoke and trees, but I could hear him. The lonely, rhythmic report of a single M1 Garand fighting a one-man war. We were still alive, and I had no earthly idea why. The German assault had shattered. Soldiers were scrambling back towards the town, dragging their wounded, their organized attack reduced to a panicked retreat. The smoke from the burning truck provided a perfect screen for our withdrawal. We had survived. I couldn't believe it, but we had. We found a defensible position in a cluster of rocks further down the creek and began tending to our wounded, our ears still ringing, our bodies numb with adrenaline and exhaustion. The Ghost on the ridge had fallen silent. The lone M1 was no longer firing. For a moment I thought whoever it was had either pulled back or been killed. But the pressure was off. We were alive because of him. Just as a fragile sense of relief began to settle in, the ground started to vibrate. It was a low, deep rumble that you felt in your bones before you heard it. Through a gap in the smoke, I saw it. A Panzer IV, lumbering out from behind a ruined building. It hadn't routed with the infantry. Its turret was traversing, the long 75mm cannon, sniffing the air for targets. It ignored the chaos of its own retreating soldiers and began to move methodically towards the bridge. The plan was clear. It would cross the creek and finish us off. All our miraculous survival, all the chaos sown by the Ghost, would mean nothing. We were out of anti-tank rockets. We had nothing bigger than a rifle grenade, which would just annoy it. We were cornered animals, and the steel predator was coming to finish the job. I watched, helpless, as the 30-ton machine reached the bridgehead. Its tracks clanked onto the stone surface, slow and unstoppable. My men saw it too. I saw the last flicker of hope die in their eyes. We were dead. But then I saw something else. A flicker of movement on the bridge itself, near the central arch on the far side. A lone figure, low against the stone railing, almost invisible in the smoke and shadows. He was placing something against the keystone of the main arch. It wasn't a large satchel charge, but something smaller, more precise. For an insane second, my mind refused to process what I was seeing. The figure finished its work, scrambled back, and disappeared into the ditch on the far side, just as the Panzer reached the middle of the bridge. There was a sharp, contained blast. It wasn't a massive, bridge-destroying explosion. It was a crack, like a giant bone snapping. A sickening groan of tortured masonry echoed across the creek. The Panzer lurched to a sudden, violent halt. A web of cracks spread across the stone archway beneath it. The bridge didn't collapse, but it sagged, dropping a full 2 feet in the center. The tank was trapped, its front end dipped precariously over the fractured stone, its path forward completely blocked. The crew, probably terrified, fired one last wild shot into the woods before revving their engine and clumsily backing the behemoth off the crippled structure. The path was closed. Out of the smoke and dust on the far bank, a soldier rose from the ditch and walked towards us. He was caked in mud and grime. His uniform was torn, and there was a dark smear of blood on his cheek. He carried his M1 Garand with a casual competence that was a world away from the clumsy boy who had dropped it at my feet. The face was Bishop's, but the eyes were not. The terrified, naive look was gone, replaced by a cold, weary calm. They were the eyes of a man who had seen the abyss and had not blinked. He picked his way across the creek, using the rocks for footing, and stopped in front of me. The other 4 survivors of my platoon just stared, their mouths agape. He didn't offer excuses or explanations. He just looked at me and reported, his voice steady. "The ridge is clear, Sergeant. I found a satchel charge on a knocked-out half-track up there." Not enough to drop the whole bridge, but I saw the stress fractures in the keystone from an earlier bombing run. I studied architecture for 2 years before enlisting. They said I didn't have the vision for it. He paused, looking at the crippled bridge and the retreating tank. Figured I could put the knowledge to use. He had done it all. The flanking fire, the grenade on the MG-42, the bazooka on the truck, and finally crippling the bridge with a surgeon's precision. He had seen the entire battlefield, not as a soldier, but as a blueprint. He found the structural flaw in their plan and brought the whole thing down. I stared at him. I saw the scared kid I had sent to die, and I saw the soldier who had saved us all. There were no words. Thank you was too small. I'm sorry was a worthless insult. I looked him up and down, taking in the man he had become in the space of a few hours. Then I gave him a single sharp nod. It wasn't praise. It was more than that. It was an acknowledgement. It was respect. Later, when the medics were taking our wounded and the fight was truly over, I sat on a fallen log, cleaning my rifle. Bishop sat a few feet away, doing the same. Without a word, I pulled out my flask of whiskey, my last one. I didn't offer it. I just held it out to him. He looked at me, his calm eyes meeting mine, and took it. He took a short pull and handed it back. In that moment, he wasn't a replacement anymore. He wasn't a burden. He was one of us.